Almost.
Oh, yeah. I'm like right there. Okay.
Good girl.
We're going to start with this. I didn't look and see how long this was. Okay. We got enough of the shofar. That is a shofar. We are doing this today because today is Rosh Hashanah. It actually started Friday night and it goes through tonight. It is one of the Jews' 2 New Year's celebrations. This is the big celebration. They have another one later in, I forgot exactly when. I'm not going to guess, or I might get it wrong. Traditional greeting for Rosh Hashanah is Shana Tova. So Jews will go around saying Shana Tova to each other during this time. We saw Rosh Hashanah several times in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. We'll probably see it in Deuteronomy. It is one of the most holy holidays. They spend it by times of prayer, going to the synagogue. And since this year Rosh Hashanah falls on the Sabbath, they were already going to the synagogue, so it made it even more special. So the apples and the honey loaves, they traditionally dip apples in honey. This is one of their sweet holidays. They want to remember it as sweet, so they have lots of sweets. And then they eat challah bread. I couldn't find challah bread, so I got honey loaves for you. So feel free to dip apples in honey, celebrate the Jewish New Year, have a honey loaf. David said I can't take them home, so I needed to eat them. It is the year 5784. 5784 in the Jewish New Year. So they started counting a whole lot before us. They also consider this to be the birthday of Adam and Eve. So wish Adam and Eve happy birthday. Yeah. Now another thing is, after this are 10 holy days of prayer and atonement, trying to get yourself right, because they consider today that your name will be written in the book of life for the year if you are a righteous person. So 10 days from now is Yom Kippur. You have between now and Yom Kippur to get your life straight, or you are not in the book of life for the next year. So aren't we glad we don't have to worry about, are we in the book of life this year or not? We are in the book of life. So
they have lots of holidays.
they do. And we've talked about the major ones because they come out of Moses' writing. We have the Feast of Trumpets, which we have the Feast of Booths, we have the Day of Atonement, we have Festival of Weeks, we have Passover, we have trying to think what else.
Saturday was strict. No more. Sabbath.
Yeah, they have the Sabbath. And again, this year, Rosh Hashanah fell on the Sabbath. So, one of the Jewish holidays that didn't come out of Moses' writing is Purim, because that comes out of Esther. So, they have a lot of, this is the most holy. And then Yom Kippur is the most solemn. That's when they really remember what they've done 10 days from now. So right now, it's the time of celebration. Their challah bread for this occasion is round, to symbolize having a round year. They make it really sweet, because you could have challah bread that's with onion seeds and things like that. No, today they normally do raisins, because it's sweet. Everything about this is sweet, remembering God. So, while we are studying Deuteronomy 3, go ahead and snack on apples and honey loaves. And, we're starting in verse 12. And remember that Moses is giving a recap of everything. So now he's talking about how they conquered things. So verses 12 through 17. Okay.
When we took possession of this land at that time, I gave to the Reubenites and the Gadites the territory beginning at Aror, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, and half the hill country of Gilead, with its cities, the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, that is, all the region of Argob, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh. All that portion of Bashan is called the land of Rephaim. Jair, the Manassite, took all the region of Argob, that is, Bashan, as far as the border of the Jebushites and the Maacathites, and called the villages after his own name, Havoth Jair, as it is to this day. The Machir I gave Gilead, and to the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave the territory from Gilead, as far as the valley of the Arnon, with the middle of the valley as a border, as far over as the river Jabbok, the border of the Ammonites, the Arabah also, with the Jordan as the border, from Chinnereth as far as the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, under the slopes of Pisgah on the east.
Okay, so here is where it's actually stated that it's 2.5 tribes that are staying on the east side of the Jordan. Up till now, it's always talked about the 2 tribes, but now we get to hear about the other half tribe. And God okays it. It's not his plan, but he okays it as long as they fulfill their obligations to the rest of the tribes. Unfortunately, in the future, these 2.5 tribes are going to feel really left out, because they aren't in the promised land. They feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens.
But yet that was their choice.
That was their choice. And eventually, in Joshua, we're going to see they're going to build their own altar, because it's just too far to go to the right altar.
It's proof that instant gratification isn't always what's best.
Yep. We see Chinnereth in here. Other names for Chinnereth are Tiberias, Gennesaret, and Galilee. So when it's talking about Chinnereth, we'd know it most as the Sea of Galilee. Okay, verse 18 through 20.
I commanded you at that time, the Lord your God has given you this land to take possession of it. But all your able-born men armed for battle must cross over ahead of the other Israelites the Israelites. However, your wives, your children, and your livestock, I know you have much livestock, may stay in the town I have given you, until the Lord give rest to your fellow Israelites as he has to you. And they too have taken over the land that the Lord your God is giving them across the Jordan. After that, each of you may go back to the possession I have given you.
Okay, and again, something we're going to learn in the future is that they don't all go. I think, can't remember what the count was, but a lot of the men stayed back, protecting the land. But at the heart of this section is God's desire to keep this people unified. Even though they are going to live across the Jordan from each other, he wants them to remain one people. So they are going to need to go in and conquer the entire land of Canaan. And at that point, then they're allowed to go back. It's going to be 7 years before they go back. And they don't really ever conquer all of Canaan anyway, but it's 7 years before they're allowed to go back. Okay, verse 21 and 22. This is new stuff.
At that time I commanded Joshua, you have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you.
Okay. So Joshua is being encouraged by Moses. He has a huge task ahead of him. He is going to take this people, which Moses has discovered are not so easy to lead. He's going to take them in, and they are going to go into a land where they are not wanted. And they're going to have to take it. It's not an easy thing to do. So Joshua's encouraged to remember how they had conquered the two kings, those two mighty kings. And that's just the first step. They are going to conquer everyone they come in contact with as long as they obey God. Of course, they don't always obey God, so they don't always win. But looking back on something God has done for them encourages Joshua. It can be the same way for us. We can look back on what God's done for us when we're having a tough time and say, God, you got me through that. You can get me through this too. Okay, this is a hunk, verse 23 through 29.
Let's see. Then I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do anything like your works and your mighty deeds? I pray, let me cross over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, those pleasant mountains and Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me on your account and would not listen to me. So the Lord said to me, enough of that. Speak no more to me of this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift your eyes toward the west, the north, the south, and the east. Behold it with your eyes, for you shall not cross over this Jordan. But command Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause them to inherit the land which you will see. So we stayed in the valley opposite Beth Peor.
Moses has had such a close relationship with God that he knows God is full of mercy and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And he thinks it doesn't hurt to ask. We've seen Moses pray over and over and over again for the people. This time he prayed for himself. And what was the answer?
No.
Nope. Short and sweet.
Yep. Nope. It just goes to show, my mother died angry at God because God didn't answer her prayer the way she thought it should be answered. Here we have Moses, who had such a great relationship with God, and God says no. Imagine Moses' pain. You can split Moses' life into periods of 40 years. He spent the first 40 years of his life confident. He was the prince of Egypt. He thought he could take care of everything. The next 40 years, his confidence is really shaken. He's spending 40 years taking care of sheep out in the wilderness, so far away from what his life was like before. Now this last 40 years, he's been used by God to do what God wanted him to do. And this is how it ends, just short of the finish line. And God doesn't want to hear him.
God gave him good eyes. He makes it so hard.
He did. He's 120 years old and he's seeing this stuff.
What's Mount Pisgah?
It is, I think it's also, from what I remember, Mount Horeb.
Okay.
So, the mountain with a good view. You turn one way and you're seeing the Israelites, seeing the other way, you're seeing the Promised Land. Don't you feel bad for Moses?
Yeah.
One slip up. But Moses was judged by a higher standard. He was the leader of these people. If he slips, the whole nation slips even farther.
It sets the status quo for the following leaders as well.
Yeah. When we hit James chapter 3, when the pastor preaches on it, it talks about how a teacher is held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And think about Moses. He's the ultimate teacher. He's got a higher standard.
But God wasn't finished with him.
No.
Commissioned Joshua, encourage and strengthen him.
That's a job for
That's a
him.
good point.
Yeah, definitely a good point. So that God was going to allow him to see the Promised Land at least. None of those others from his generation, Joshua and Caleb, are the only ones that are going to see the Promised Land. No one else saw it. Would have been easy for Moses to have a bad attitude here. Like, God, do it yourself. You go encourage Joshua. But no, God, like Jana said, God still had a job for him. He was to encourage Joshua. He was to prepare them to go in, prepare them to go where he wanted to go. And he did it with a great heart. He's a true shepherd. He's not centered on himself. He's centered on the people and what is good for the people and how to keep that relationship between God and the people. So this brings us up to date on the story of Moses. They're about 25 miles from crossing the Jordan River. Okay, so Deuteronomy 4, something to notice here. There are times when our English language just fails us. Moses uses the term you a lot here. Sometimes the term is you, and sometimes the term is y'all. It'd be better if we used the Southern language, y'all. So sometimes he's talking to individuals, and sometimes he's talking to the group. So we'll have to watch that. Okay. Betty, verse 1 through 8.
Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I am teaching you to perform, so that you may live and go in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I am commanding you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord has done in the case of Baal Peor. For all the men who followed Baal Peor, the Lord your God has destroyed them from among you. But you hold fast to the Lord your God, are alive today, every one of you. How far?
2:8.
See, I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do thus in the land where you are entering to possess it. So keep and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of people who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as is the Lord our God, whenever we call on him? Or what great nation is there that has statutes and judgments as righteous as this whole law which I am setting before you today?
Okay, so this section is a y'all section. It's addressing the nation. He had reminded them already of all their rebellions and all the bad things. Now it's time to talk to them about how they need to obey. They need to forget their past rebellions. Not in a way of, it won't blot it out of their mind, but don't dwell on those. Learn from those. Learn, you don't want to do that anymore. You want to obey God. One of Satan's great strategies is to make us remember what we shouldn't and help us to forget what we should remember. You would think, okay, they're getting ready to cross the Jordan. They need to talk about battle strategies. But no, Moses is talking to them about spiritual things. Their spiritual life lived or died based on their obedience. And that obedience would bring them the victory in the physical. If they live in disobedience, they are going to get conquered. They're going to be in a lot of trouble. We're going to see in Joshua their first military loss is going to be in Ai, in Joshua 7, because they disobeyed God. You obey God, you win. You disobey God, you lose. It's same for us today. We obey God, we win. Disobey God, you got problems. When Moses says listen, it's not just the word listen. Another thing where our language doesn't do it. It means listen and do. So much more than in one ear and out the other. Is in one ear, make it stick there and pay attention to it. Remember last week's sermon was about be doers of the word, not hearers only. This is Moses saying the same thing. 40 years earlier, their parents were told the same thing. Listen. And they didn't. And where are they all now? Their bones are out there in the middle of the desert somewhere. And they're hearing Moses speak at a place where they were disobedient. This is where the Midianite women had is that the right group? had tempted them, and they had relations and same spot. So they know their disobedience and what kind of problems it causes. So what are they to hear? They're to hear the statutes and the judgments. So the statutes are basically the permanent rules. Fixed by God. No changing those rules. They are rules forever. Judgments, or yours may say rules, are judicial decisions based on the statutes. Together they make up the law. So in here we see a pattern we're gonna see several times. Hear God's word, obey God's word, enjoy spiritual prosperity, and possess promised spiritual possessions. They're going to hear that. We're going to hear it through Joshua over and over. Hear, obey, you get the blessings, you get the possessions. Focusing on the positive side. Obedience. That's the basis of all this. Peter Forsyth, a Scottish theologian, he said, the first duty of every soul is to find not its freedom, but its master. We always seem to be so concerned with our freedom. Freedom of choice, freedom of will, freedom to do whatever we want our way, but it's not about freedom. It's about obeying our master, his choices, his will, his way. Okay, look at verse 2. When it talks about not adding to this. Normally when we think about a verse about not adding to God's word, we think of Revelation 22. But here's another place. We're not to add anything to God's law or take anything away. Now the rabbis, they're going to come right along and they are going to add so much to these. They're going to write books and books and books about all this. And Moses is saying, don't do that. Moses talks about the sin that they had at Baal Peor with the women. And this is something this generation has been involved in. You know, all the other things were their parents. Well, no, they sinned too. Verses 6 through 8. 3 times we hear that Israel is going to be a great nation. When the world thinks of a great nation, what do they think of? They think of someone that has massive military power, economic power. For the most part, somewhat under David and Solomon, they had some of that, but pretty much they never had great worldwide military power. Or
actually, now they have very much. Computerizing.
and
This is what I'm hearing, that they are among the best.
it's hard to say. They're such a small nation.
Small, but
But
very small. Materially.
yeah, so
But today, everybody's a lot of places are fighting to be a great nation, like Russia and China and North Korea,
yeah,
and even us. You know.
yeah. When you think of the great nations of the world, you think of U.S. and China and Russia.
Well, and all the lands that England had.
England at one time was the greatest nation on the earth. And, but that's not the kind of great nation Israel is going to be. They're going to be a great nation because they're following God. God's intention is that Israel will be a great witness of his love and his power among the nations, not
Still
their
there,
military.
right? I mean, and that shows you something. God is with them.
Yep,
Or that
God had a plan.
countries could have demolished them.
Yeah, in most of our lifetime, forget her, we've seen Israel attacked, and they should have been wiped out. How many times?
I know.
And God brought miracles to protect them. So God still has a plan for them.
God remains faithful to his people.
Yeah. Well, and they're written about in the book of Revelation and all the prophecies. So God does have a plan. He's told us some of it. Okay. Oh, I'm going to read this one because it's just so long. I'm not going to stick anybody with it. I'm going to read 9 through 20. Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. How on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children so. And you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud and gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. And he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, that is, the 10 Commandments. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and rules, that you might do them in the land that you are going over to possess. Therefore watch yourself very carefully, since you saw no form on that day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance, as you are this day. So verses 9 through 14 are one long sentence. Remember, they like their run-on sentences. They just go on and on and on. So Moses taught the people. Winston Churchill said, I like to learn, but I don't like to be taught. We can't help it. We are taught. We're always learning. We're never too old. We are always learning something. But we need to control what we're learning. If we learn what the world is teaching today, we're going to be pretty messed up. It's kind of scary to see our grandkids having to maneuver around what they're being taught.
Amen.
So Moses is warning them, teach your children and your grandchildren. Alexander the Great, one of the things that made his army so powerful was that the women traveled with him, and if they had babies, those babies grew up in that camp. They grew up around war and weapons. They were so well acquainted with everything around them that it was natural for them to fight in the army. And they became part of this really powerful army. because that's what they were taught from the beginning. Now just think, if our children are taught from the beginning, they can be part of a powerful army too.
You know, but I'm so glad to see the children in our church.
Yeah.
Every Sunday they're there. And they may look like they're not listening, because I taught Sunday school where they didn't listen, where I thought they weren't. But you know what? They're getting their education right from get-go, and it thrills me to the bone.
Yeah. And because these Israelites are surrounded by heathen nations, they are one generation away from losing their nation. They're losing God's blessing if they don't teach their children. Their world would. It's the same today. We don't teach our children, the world's going to teach them.
Well, you can teach them, and they're proving now that the colleges are corrupting them, even though youth have had their whole life. People are finding out their whole life in church, and they go to these colleges, and within 2 years they have them totally turned around and rebels.
So true, Billy. So true.
Because that's where we're the most vulnerable, really. Because
Yeah,
that's when we take our first steps as being an adult, and we hit those crossroads. Is, do we follow what we were raised with, or do we become our own person and do what we want? And it's such a pivotal moment in our lives.
Yes, my son at the age of probably in his late 40s decided to go back to college, and the first class that he took, he came home. He was living with us at the time. And he came home and he said, "This teacher is teaching against Christ."
Yeah. Well, and
First class he took.
before we were too hard on colleges today, remember back when a lot of us were young teens? What were colleges becoming then? They were the places where you did all the protests against the Vietnam War and hippies and free love, and we started it.
So it's not a new concept.
So no matter how you teach your kids, you have to be careful as they start out as young adults.
You need to stay involved with them. You can't just send them off to college and let loose and say, "Okay, I've taught them." You need to be a lifelong teacher.
Thank God, he had it just enough to know the difference in what that teacher was doing.
Just like the college kids in our Ignite group, when I was in that group, you know, so many just were so faithful. They went up, they did the whole program through the Ignite group, but now I don't see any in church. You know, I mean, they went the opposite direction. So
well, and things are still happening. Wheaton College, I think that was college, in Illinois, huge revival, baptized hundreds. Christ is still working.
He is.
So
that's what I say to myself, God is still moving no matter what.
yeah.
He's still here.
Yeah. Okay, and then they were especially to remember what happened at Mount Horeb, another name for Mount Sinai. Kind of interesting because even if any of these guys were alive, they were babies. And they're to remember what happened. The only way for them to remember what happened is that their parents would have taught them. So he stresses, don't forget. What are they not to forget?
The commandments that God gave them.
And
how God had led them.
Yeah.
Fed them.
Yeah. I saw a post about 9/11 this week, and someone was saying, it's time to get over that. Yeah. It's like,
survivors are still alive.
even if they're
their
not.
families.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still fresh in people.
Yeah.
There's no way.
So if you look back on the history of the United States, there's other things that we've said, don't forget, or let's remember. Remember the Alamo.
Well, Pearl Harbor, we don't
Yeah.
forget Pearl Harbor.
We shouldn't
Do we?
forget any of
Do we?
them.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget any of it.
Yeah.
But do we remember those things? Remember the main. There's
They're
been
taking,
things.
they're taking down people's statues now that we were supposed to remember and know what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It was
things
interesting,
like
I
that.
flew out to Denver on Monday morning, and the pilot, before we left St. George, spent about 5 minutes. I think he was probably reading it, but whatever it was good. It sounded like his conversation, remembering 9/11 in detail.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, you know, it's very, of course, very sobering,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he's, before we took off.
Yeah.
You know, and it could happen again today, you know, I mean, Monday was a bad day for me. I mean, I woke up crying, I went to bed crying for the lost people, you know, but, because they were supposed to send a plane to San Francisco where I had went for a dental appointment, and they closed the train station, so we could not leave the train station. But anyway, so we don't know how close we come yet, but,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
still
so-
a sad day for me, you know.
So yeah, they're there to remember this stuff, even though they didn't hear it firsthand. So even when we're past the generations that saw 9/11, it's not something to forget. I mean, the last of our Pearl Harbor survivors are coming to an end, but we still need to remember. They are to remember, well, this is something to remember throughout the generations, the 10 Commandments. Now, the word 10 Commandments is actually a really bad translation. Another thing where English, but that's the one that's stuck. It's actually 10 words or 10 declarations. And we see 2 tablets. But if you remember when we studied back in Exodus, it didn't actually mean that the tablets are split 5 on this tablet and 5 on this tablet. I think that's what we traditionally see. And when you see someone do like a statue or something with the 10 Commandments, it's 5 on this and 5 on that. No, it was 2 copies. So these 10 words are the foundation of everything. There are governments, nations that are not Christian nations, that their basic laws are the same thing as the 10 Commandments. They are the ones that make sense for a society. Of course, the one about worshiping God, that's a little different. But this section focuses on images. They didn't see a form of God. God is spirit. You don't see God. So God says, don't try to make a representation of me. No one has ever seen me. And if you try to make a representation, you're going to try to worship that thing, and that thing's, whatever you make, it's not, it's stone, it's not me. And if you have that, you're going to be tempted to think that's me, and it's not me. I was trying to think, do we know any great Jewish artists? It just came on me. I haven't researched. I can't think of one. Because they didn't do, they will carry it to a real big extreme where they will not make an image of it. In fact, here it says, don't make an image of an animal.
That you could worship,
Because you might start worshiping that thing. So I'll have to look and see if there's any great Jewish artists. They're forbidden to worship the creations of God, because that's not God. That's things He made. Worship the Creator, not the creations. Verse 21 through 24. And Rebecca, I think that'll be you.
Furthermore, the Lord was angry with me for your sakes, and swore that I should not go over Jordan, and that I should not go in unto the good land which the Lord thy God gives thee for an inheritance. But I must die in this land. I must not go over Jordan, but you will go over and possess the good land. Take heed unto yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make you create an image or the likeness of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, even a jealous God.
So doesn't it almost sound like Moses is trying to blame the people? I'd be going if it weren't for you. That's not Moses' heart at all. He actually takes blame for what he did. But essentially what he's saying, if God didn't spare me, and look at who I am, I have served God faithfully, what makes you think you can do whatever you want? You notice there's so much emphasis on building idols. I mean, there's other commandments, but the main focus seems to be on don't build idols.
That was one of the first things they did, though.
It is.
The golden calf.
It's one of their Achilles' heels, and so Moses really wants to drill into them while he still can.
Yeah. He knows where their problem is. And says, don't do that. We still do it today. I mean, we have our idols. And we worship them. They can be movie stars. They can be your job. They could be going on vacation. Anything that is put above God. I used to have this friend that became a pastor. I was so surprised when he became a pastor. But he used to take trips, lots of trips, to the beach and stuff like that on Sunday. And his feeling was, well, God gives me grace. He'll forgive me. You're the pastor. You need to be preaching your sermon at church. It's like, no. God comes first. And it talks about God being a jealous God. He is the only being ever that has the right to be jealous. Amen. And he is not jealous for himself. He is jealous for his people. Yeah. He wants his people worshiping him. Not because of an ego trip. But he could have an ego trip. I mean, he's God. But because he knows that by worshiping him, they will have the best. They'll have the blessings. If they worship something else, they're losing out. Let's look at verses 25 through 28.
I just noticed that how he identifies God. He starts off the Lord, the God of your fathers, and then it's Lord your God, Lord my God, Lord our God, and then Lord your God. It's interesting how it progresses in that chapter.
It is.
In other words, he is God.
Yeah. Everybody's God.
Yeah.
Okay, so 25 through 28.
When you have children and grandchildren and have been in the land a long time, and if you act corruptly, make an idol in the form of anything, and do what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, provoking him to anger. I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today, that you will quickly perish from the land you are about to cross, the Jordan to possess. You will not live long there, but you will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be reduced to a few survivors among the nations where the Lord your God will drive you out.
To 28.
You said 28?
Mm-hmm. So it's the first time we hear that God saying, if you worship idols, I'm going to take you out of the land. Does that happen?
Yep.
God is such a patient God. It happens 550 years later. But it happens. And he's going to, it's like he's saying, you want to worship idols? I'm going to send you a place where they worship lots of idols. Lots and lots of idols. You're going there. And that, Babylon.
Show you how the other people live.
Yeah. Show you just what you're missing. Verses 29 through 31.
I didn't read 28.
Oh, 28? Oh, go ahead and read 28.
There you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see, hear, eat, or smell. But from there you will search for the Lord your God, and you will find him when you seek him with all your heart and all your soul. When you are in distress and all the things have happened to you, you will return to the Lord your God in later days and obey him. He will not leave you, destroy you, or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them by oath, because the Lord your God is a compassionate God.
Okay, so in their exile, still, God is not going to abandon them. When they're ready to turn back to God, he'll be ready to receive them. Did that happen? Did it happen? They come back. They're received back into Israel. But their repentance had to be real. They had to seek God with all their heart and all their soul and all their might. The Shema. They had to. I mean, they would recite that but not mean it, but they had to mean it. And this is how they have to do it through obedience. So we're back to the obedience thing. This is another pretty long set, verses 32 through 40.
For ask now concerning the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and asked from one end of heaven to the other, whether any great thing like this has happened, or anything like it has been heard. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of fire, as you have heard and lived? Or did God ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? When did you say to stop?
Go ahead and stop there.
Oh, okay.
It was farther, but that's okay. Bonnie, I'm going to have you pick up from there, 36 through 40.
35 or 36?
35, sorry. Yeah.
To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord himself is God. There is none other beside him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might instruct you on earth. He showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and brought you out of Egypt with his presence, with his mighty power. driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance, as it is this day. Therefore know this day and consider it in your heart, that the Lord himself is God in heaven above, and on the earth beneath. There is no other. You shall therefore keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time.
Okay, so he's asking them, look back. Look back and see what I've done for you. Can you see any other God ever doing those kind of things for his people? Ever? Do you see any God taking a nation for his people? Most other nations had multiple gods, and you had to do insane things to please those gods. But not this God. This God did for us. They had seen God in a special way. They saw his holy fire, and they benefited from God. All they had to do was obey God. And God says, obey God, obey me for your own good. If you obey me, you're going to get great things. Who wouldn't want that? Yeah, apparently they don't. We are so close to the end, but too far to go. So we will pick up in verse 41 next week.